Previously on Perihelion, Year 2 on Draken. The ship is taking shape. The fuel is real. Something has been watching from the tree line, helping from a distance, never speaking, never approaching. In the final moments of Episode 3, the three-note call became 4. Something changed when it realized they knew. Year 2, Month 5. The ship had a name now, not an official name. Nothing about this situation was official, but a name the women had drifted into using without deciding to. They called her the Meridian. Not quite right, because she was nothing like the Meridian they had arrived in. But the original ship had given her bones, and the name felt like an inheritance worth keeping. She stood in the clearing, and she was almost done. The hull was closed. The propulsion housing, Meridian 7's original core, rebuilt around Bess's new architecture, was seated. The fuel lines were run. The navigation core was recalibrated to the best of their tool's ability. The internal cabin was stripped to essentials: 5 berths, a pilot station, a systems panel, a small equipment bay. She was not beautiful. She had been built by 5 women with salvaged tools on an alien planet, and she looked exactly like that. But she was structurally sound, and she was real. And that was more than anyone who knew their situation would have predicted. Bess walked the exterior with her checklist every morning. She had done so for 3 weeks. She would continue until the day they launched. May brought her coffee. Not real coffee, but the closest Draken had offered. A brew May had developed in month 8 from a roasted native seed that produced a hot, dark, slightly bitter result everyone had agreed to call coffee rather than what it actually was. 4 items on the close-out list, Bess said, not looking up. Down from 11 last week, May said. Down from 11. The fuel line coupling on the port side. The navigation array calibration. It's within tolerance, but I want better. The secondary heat shield layer on the underside. And the fuel delivery system. The fuel delivery system has been on the list for 6 weeks. I know. Bess stopped at the fuel housing, looked at it. Kay has been at it every day. The refined compound behaves differently under pressure than standard propellant. The delivery rate is inconsistent. It'll run stable for a while and then surge. In atmosphere, a surge at the wrong moment. Is bad, May said. Is very bad. Yes. How close is Kay? She'd tell you she's close. She tells me that every day. I think she's starting to wonder if the solution exists. Inside the ship's fuel systems bay, Kay was surrounded by data she had looked at so many times, the numbers had stopped meaning what they used to mean. This was a thing that happened when you stared at a problem too long. The symbols became shapes. The shapes became wallpaper, and the answer stopped revealing itself. She knew the theoretical solution. She'd modeled it 40 times. The compound should flow at a controlled rate through the modified injector housing. It did flow at a controlled rate until a pressure differential in the chamber triggered an inconsistency in the compound's viscosity at temperature. She had accounted for this. Her accounting was correct. The system should compensate. It didn't compensate. Iola appeared at the entry hatch. Minty says breakfast. In a minute, Kay said. You've been in here since the 5th hour. I know. Iola sat down, uninvited. What's the specific problem? Not the summary. The specific thing. At ignition temperature, Kay said. She didn't usually explain her technical work to Iola, but today the problem was heavy enough to say aloud. The compound's viscosity shifts by a factor I can predict, but not control. The injector housing needs to compensate for that shift in real time. My current design compensates correctly at stable temperatures, but lags when the temperature rises quickly, which it will at launch. So you need the housing to react faster. I need the housing to anticipate, not react. By the time it reacts, the surge has already... She stopped. Yes, faster. And you can't make the housing faster with what you have. I've tried every variation I can model. There's something I'm missing and I cannot find it. A rare admission. She set down her stylus. Iola was quiet for a moment. Would you recognize it? She said carefully. If something else found it for you. Kay looked at her. She meant the presence. The 4-note caller. That's not a solution I can plan around, Kay said quietly. No, but it's something that's been here longer than we have, and it knows this ship better than it should. I'm not suggesting we ask. I'm suggesting we leave the problem visible, the way you leave a door open. Kay looked at her data, at the fuel housing, at the problem she couldn't solve. When she went to breakfast, she left the data panels active, day 17. The ground moved, not violently, not enough to knock anyone down, but enough to feel. A deep, rolling shudder through the soil that lasted 3 seconds and stopped. Then another, shorter, then stillness. All 5 women stopped what they were doing, looked at each other, looked at the ground. That's the 4th tremor this month, May said immediately, scanning her geological log. Are those numbers normal? Minty asked. I don't have a normal to compare to, but the frequency is increasing. Month 3 had 1, month 4 had 2. We've had 4 in 17 days. The basin, Kay said. The basin is sitting above the primary fault system. If the fault is becoming more active, the fuel deposits, Bess said. The deposits aren't going anywhere immediately, but the access could be affected if the basin floor. Silence after. We need to move faster, Bess said quietly to Kay. I know. Day 22. Minty saw it first. She was on the ridge above camp, her habit, checking the perimeter, when something caught in her peripheral vision. A streak in the upper atmosphere. Too deliberate for debris. Too sustained for a meteor. She watched it. It dropped. She could see the struggle, a vessel fighting a planet's pull with not quite enough to fight it with. The trajectory corrected, partially, then failed. The streak became a line, the line became a descent, and the descent became... Incoming, she called down to camp. Everyone was out, looking up. The vessel cleared the tree line to the northeast, small, strange-shaped, not from Eden Beta's design vocabulary, and dropped hard into the wide field 200 meters from camp. The impact was heavy but controlled at the last moment, like something or someone had chosen a landing over a crash. 5 women stood at the camp perimeter, looking at the thing that had just landed on their planet. That is not one of ours, Bess said after a long moment. No, Kay said. Shape of the hull, propulsion placement, nothing like anything from Eden Beta. No. Contact, Iola said very quietly. Writing. Nobody moved for a moment. We wait, Minty said, positioning herself at the front. They waited. The strange vessel settled. Something vented from it, steam or atmosphere, or the exhalation of a system that had made it further than it should have. Then the hatch opened. A figure. She dropped to the ground and stood. She was the right height, the right shape. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head facing forward. But the details were wrong in ways that were hard to immediately name. Her skin had taken on the faint bioluminescent undertone of Draken's own biology, as if the planet had gradually been written into her. Her movements were too fluid, too perfectly balanced, adjusted to a gravity she knew better than she was born to. Her eyes, when she turned and they could see her face, were different, darker, the pupils wider, as if they had learned to gather light from a world that offered it differently. She looked at them. They looked at her. She did not run. She did not advance. She stood at a distance of perhaps 50 meters, and she was patient. The patience of someone who has waited a long time and is prepared to wait longer. "What do we do?" Bess said under her breath. "We do what we'd want someone to do for us," Kay said just as quietly. She took one step forward. "We don't run." The first meeting was wordless. Kay walked toward the figure, slowly, hands visible. No tools, no equipment. The others watched from the camp perimeter. Minty with her weight forward, ready. Bess with her arms crossed. May with her log already open. Iola recording everything. Kay stopped at 20 meters. The figure watched her. Kay sat down on the ground. Not a threat, not an advance, just here. A long pause. The figure tilted her head, looked at Kay on the ground, looked at the camp, looked back at Kay. Then, slowly, she sat down too. They sat across from each other, two people with no common language on a planet that belonged to neither of them. "My name is Kay," Kay said after a while, quietly, knowing she wouldn't be understood, but trying anyway. The figure watched her mouth, watched her face. Kay put her hand on her chest. "Kay." The figure looked at the hand on Kay's chest. Then she put her own hand on her own chest. What came out was not a word Kay had heard before, but it was, unmistakably, the same gesture given back. Kay nodded. She understood the gesture, May said quietly, to no one in particular. "She mirrored it," Iola said, writing. "That means she's done this before," Bess said. "Introductions, exchanges. She knows what it means." "It means she's been around people before," Minty said, watching. "A beat." "Or she was people before," May said. Nobody said anything to that. The days that followed were not fast, and they were not easy, but they were real. For the first 2 days, the figure maintained the 50-meter distance. She ate from her own vessel. She slept there, but she watched. May was the first to reduce the distance. She did it the way she did everything, scientifically, without drama. She walked into the field and set down a cup of Draken coffee and backed away. The figure approached, picked it up, smelled it, tasted it. Something crossed her face, recognition or surprise, maybe both. She liked it, Bess said quietly from the workshop, watching. "You can tell." Iola attempted to establish a shared vocabulary. She held up objects and said their names. The figure watched. She didn't repeat the words, but the next day she picked up the same objects and gestured at them, waiting for Iola to say the word again. She was learning by listening first. On the 5th day, the figure walked into camp. Not invited, not invited. She walked in as if she'd decided the distance was no longer necessary. She went to Bess's workshop and looked at the ship frame for a long time. Bess came out. They stood beside each other, both looking at the ship, and nobody said a word. Day 8. The figure was in the workshop again. She came in, looked at the components, touched nothing, just looked. Today she did something different. She picked up a piece of hull material Bess had set aside, a strip she was going to use for a secondary panel, turned it in her hands. Her fingers found the stress points with a certainty that wasn't guessing. She set it down, picked up a different piece. Same process. Bess watched from the doorway, coffee in hand. The figure selected 3 strips, arranged them on the workbench in an overlapping pattern. Then she looked at Bess. Bess came over, looked at the arrangement. The overlap pattern distributed stress differently than Bess's current design for that panel. It was better. Not dramatically, but measurably. "You know what you're looking at," Bess said very quietly. The figure didn't respond. She couldn't, not in words, but her eyes didn't move from Bess's face. "Okay," Bess said. She picked up her tools, She rebuilt the panel the way the figure had arranged it. The figure watched every step. She didn't help further, just watched, with the careful attention of someone making sure the work was done right. Day 10. The figure appeared in the hatchway of the fuel systems bay. Kay looked up, and the figure was simply there, standing. Looking at the data panels Kay had left visible, Kay's first instinct was to move between the figure and the panels. She stopped herself. A door left open. She stepped aside instead. The figure entered slowly. She looked at the panels with the same careful attention she had given Bess's workshop. Not rushing, not performing, just reading. Kay watched her read. After a few minutes, the figure pointed at one specific panel, the pressure differential readout. Held up one finger. Then she pointed at a second panel, the injector housing temperature curve. Held up a second finger. Then she looked at Kay and brought the two fingers together. Kay went very still. The two systems aren't talking to each other, she said quietly. You're saying they need to be integrated, not separate compensation loops. One combined. The figure didn't understand the words, but she saw Kay's expression change, that specific look of someone who has found the thing they were missing. And something in her own face relaxed, just slightly, as if she had been waiting to show someone this for a while. It's not the housing that needs to anticipate, Kay said to herself, working through it. It's the housing and the pressure system simultaneously. They have to read each other in real time. She looked at the data. The solution, which had been invisible 10 minutes ago, was obvious. She looked at the figure. How did you know that? She said slowly, knowing she wouldn't be understood, saying it anyway. Around the fire that evening, the figure sat with them, not inside the circle. She'd placed herself slightly outside it, which everyone chose to interpret as courtesy rather than exclusion. She was there. That was enough for now. The women hadn't named her. This had become something they noticed, the absence of a name. It created a particular kind of distance. We should give her something to be called, Iola said to the group. She has a name, Bess said. She told Kay something when they first sat down. Something we can't pronounce. Didn't stop you from calling this planet after Gerald Draken. That's different, Iola said with a slight smile. May was looking at the figure. She fixed the fuel system. She helped with every structural issue Bess couldn't resolve alone. She knows this planet's timeline better than any of us. Without her, we'd be planning a 6-month departure window and finding out too late. It was 3. She has been an asset from the moment she landed, and she is the only other living being we have encountered in 2 years. I said I'm not saying she can't come, Bess said. I said we need to redo the math. Is anyone saying she can't come? Minty asked. Silence. Nobody said it. Then Minty looked at the figure. Something in her face went quiet and decided. Dot, she said. Everyone looked at Minty. She's a point of light in the dark, Minty said with a gentleness that was very much her own. She found us. She helped us. She came in from the outside and she sat with us. Dot. The figure watched Minty's face. Something in her expression shifted. Not recognition of the word, but recognition of the intention behind it. Minty put her hand on her chest, then extended it toward the figure. Dot. The figure looked at the hand, at Minty's face, at the others. She placed her own hand on her chest, and she said it back. The word in her voice was not quite right, the vowel different, something in the consonant shaped by a mouth that had been speaking other things for a long time. But it was unmistakably the word, unmistakably an acceptance. Dot, Bess said, raising her cup. Dot, May said. Dot. Iola said, writing it down. Welcome, Kay said quietly. Month 6. Dot moved through the camp with a freedom that had surprised them at first and no longer did. She worked. That was the thing about her that settled the last of the wariness. She was not a passenger. She was a contributor. She and Bess developed a working language of their own that involved almost no words. They communicated through the work itself. A part held up for examination. A demonstration of a technique. The particular silence of two people who understand each other through what they build. Bess had started leaving components out that she wanted Dot's eyes on. Dot examined them, rearranged them if needed, or put them back unchanged. And the put back unchanged was Bess's favorite answer, because it meant what she had done was right. May and Dot surveyed the planet together. Dot's knowledge of Draken's biology was extraordinary. She took May to locations May would not have found. Formations, specimens, zones of geological interest. She had an intimacy with this planet that could only come from years. Iola watched Dot constantly, not suspiciously, analytically, building a picture. She learns language the way someone relearns it, Iola wrote. Not from zero, from somewhere near zero. As if the words were there once and went quiet. Every day more of them come back. She knows the ship. She knows the fuel system. She knows this planet. How long has she been here? May and Dot were in the northwest quadrant, the geometric formations May had been studying since year 1. Dot moved through them with the ease of someone who had walked this ground many times. May crouched beside a formation that had changed since her last visit. The base had widened. The structures were denser. She measured it, wrote it down. This is growing faster, she said to Dot, knowing Dot understood more than she let on now. The rate is, she checked her log, 3 times what it was last month, and the color is different. The copper tones were deepening, going darker, and at the very base of each structure there was something new, a darkened zone, as if something was dying from the roots up. Dot crouched beside May. She touched the darkened base of the nearest formation. Her expression was not alarmed. It was the expression of someone confirming something they already knew. You've seen this before, May said quietly. Dot looked at her. On this planet. You've watched this happen before. May gestured. A wide sweep of her hand, taking in the formations, the darkening at the roots, the accelerating growth. Dot held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. How long? May asked. Dot didn't have the words for what she wanted to say. She looked at the dying base of the formation. She picked up a pebble, set it down, picked up another, set it down, and another. 11 pebbles in a line. May stared at them. 11, she said, barely audible. She looked at Dot. Dot held her gaze. You've been watching this happen for 11? She stopped. Months? Years? Dot touched the pebbles. Then she pointed to the sky, to the orbital track she had watched the planet follow. Years, May said, very quietly. She wrote it down with a hand that was not entirely steady. May brought what she had found to the group. The pebbles, the timeline, the formations dying at the root. A heavy silence. If she's been watching the geological deterioration for 11 years, Kay said, working through it, and the pace has been accelerating. How accelerating? Bess asked. The tremor frequency alone, 1 a month in year 1, 4 in 17 days now. If the rate is consistent, by month 10 we could be looking at daily events. By month 12, how bad is month 12? I think month 12 is when the planet stops being habitable. We have 6 months, Minty said, very still. Approximately. How close is the ship? Bess asked Kay. The fuel delivery system is solved. The remaining items on the checklist. 3 to 4 months if we push. If we push. Yes. Push. Push. They all looked at Dot, who had been sitting and listening. She met their eyes. Something in her expression, not apology, not urgency, just the weight of someone who has known the ending for a while and waited for others to catch up. She came now because of this, Iola said quietly. What? Kay asked. She's been here. She's been watching us. She didn't come to us in year 1. She didn't come in the months after. She came now, when we have a ship and a fuel source and 3 to 4 months before the planet becomes uninhabitable. She came because we're the way out. We're the first way out she's had. The ship was built for 5, Bess said. The weight calculations, the fuel load, the berth configuration. I can reconfigure the calculations, Kay said. I'm not saying she can't come. I'm saying the math needs to be redone. Then we redo the math. I'm just putting the engineering on the table. It's not an engineering question, Minty said quietly. Part of it is. The part that's an engineering question, Kay and I will sort out. But that's not what we're actually debating. We're debating whether we leave her here. She fixed the fuel system, Iola said. She's helped with every structural issue Bess couldn't resolve alone. She knows this planet's timeline better than any of us. Without her, we'd be planning a 6-month departure window and finding out too late it was 3. She has been an asset from the moment she landed, and she is the only other living being we have encountered in 2 years. I said, I'm not saying she can't come, Bess said slowly. I said we need to redo the math. Is anyone saying she can't come? Minty asked. Silence. Nobody said it. Then we redo the math, Kay said quietly. She looked at Dot across the fire. Dot was watching her, reading something from her face that the words didn't carry. Kay nodded at her. Simple. Clear. Dot held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded back. Before sunrise, Bess and Dot were at the workshop together. Bess had the weight and configuration calculations spread out. Handwritten, dense, covered in her particular notations. She explained the problem in the way she had learned to explain things to Dot. Showing, not telling. The current configuration. The 6th berth that needed to be added. The fuel load equation. Dot looked at it for a while. Then she picked up Bess's pencil. Bess watched. Dot made 4 changes to the configuration. Small, specific, each one creating space without costing fuel range. Bess checked them. Checked again. How does she started and stopped herself. She looked at Dot. Dot set down the pencil and met her eyes. Where did you learn this? Bess said quietly, directly. Dot didn't answer. Not because she didn't understand the question. Bess could see that she understood, but because the answer was something she wasn't ready to give yet, or didn't know how. Instead, Dot picked up a tool. She looked at Bess. The question was clear. Can I help? Portside berth needs a mounting bracket, Bess said, turning back to the ship. She demonstrated. Dot watched. Then they worked together in the dark of early Draken. 2 women building something that might save them both. Late afternoon on the eastern ridge, Iola sat alone with her scanner and her log. Below, the camp, the ship. 6 figures working in the clearing. She wrote, Day 741 on Drakon. 14 months of building and 2 years of watching have led to this. A ship that might fly, a fuel source that should work, and a 6th person whose origin and history we don't know. She fixes what we can't fix. She sees what we can't see. She knew the timeline of this planet's death before we realized it was dying. Everything she has done has been in our interest. But I know something about being a recorder of events. I know that the most important questions are not always the most urgent ones. The most urgent question is, can we leave in time? The most important question is, who is she? I will have both answers before we go. When the tremors stopped, the planet was quiet. But the quiet had a different quality now, thinner, like a held breath. We're almost ready, Iola said to herself, to the planet, to whatever else might be listening. 6 of them stood looking at the ship. The Meridian, rebuilt, renamed, reimagined, stood in the clearing in Draken's amber evening light. She was almost done. The close-out list was down to 2 items. The fuel stockpile was sufficient. The 6th berth was mounted. 6 women standing in front of the thing they had built to take them home. Dot stood with them. Not quite in the line, still slightly apart, the distance she kept, but facing the same direction, looking at the same ship. 2 more weeks, Bess said. 2 weeks, Kay confirmed. Minty looked at the planet around them, the darkening formations in the distance, the tremor-cracked soil at the basin's edge, the changed quality of the air. We should be ready to move in 1. Bess looked at her checklist. At the ship. 1. If we work overnight. We work overnight. Nobody argued. The planet breathed its thin breath beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a gas vent that hadn't been there last month released a column of pale vapor into the amber sky. The fault line is active below the northern sector, May said, watching the vapor. That vent is new. Then we have our deadline, Kay said quietly. She looked at Dot. Dot was looking at the vapor. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands told the truth. They were still. The stillness of someone who had been patient for a very long time and could feel the patience coming to its end. We are going home, Kay said to Dot, slowly and clearly. All of us. Dot held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not quite relief, not quite grief. Something compound. The feeling of a door opening that you have been on the wrong side of for a long time. She nodded. 1 week, 1 ship, 6 women, a planet that is running out of time.